So, of course, there's been a big conversation about the bros, the young Gen Z men shifting right and backing Donald Trump, and some also just staying home. So to try to understand more of what may be going on there, we're lucky to be joined this morning by Sanjay Muralitharan. He is the vice president of the College Democrats, hoping to give some advice to his Democratic brothers and sisters. Great to see you, Sanjay. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. So let's go ahead and just put the numbers up on the screen and get your reaction to some of the shifts that we saw. So young women in 2024, 58% voted for Kamala Harris. That was a decline from 2020 when 65% voted for Joe Biden. With young men, you saw an even steeper decline. You see only 42% of young men voting for Kamala Harris, meaning that Trump won 56%. And that is a total flip from back in 2020 when Joe Biden won 56% of this population. We're talking about men under the age of 29. So what do you see in these numbers? What do you think is going on here?
Well, I think these are largely unsurprising. To put it simply, I think that as Democrats, we failed to directly make the case to young men, and the right has very much successfully exploited, I guess, the struggles of young men. And I guess to truly understand this, we have to take a step back and kind of largely contextualize Gen Z men and just Gen Z as a whole. Gen Z, we're a generation in crisis. 42% of us struggle with depression or anxiety. 73% of us have indicated that we feel alone, sometimes or always in our most formative years. And this mental health epidemic is further exacerbated within, the male populace, because it just simply isn't socially acceptable for us to go out and talk to our buddies about our feelings. We tend to kind of bottle it up, quote unquote, man up. And the result of this is terrible, and I think the right has kind of very much successfully tapped into, these feelings of these just general mal sentiments and utilized it in a way that's resulted in their electoral victory.
And why do you think, at least so far, it looks like Kamala Harris failed to inspire a big turnout among voters under the age of 29? Why do you, even compared with Joe Biden, who, by the way, I mean, it's not just Biden's age. Obviously, Bernie Sanders was able to mobilize a pretty significant chunk of the youth vote. But why do you think the Harris campaign, and I'm curious what you make of the turnout question in general, but why do you think the Harris campaign struggled to get young people even to come out and vote for her?
Well, it's hard to ignore the elephant in the room of Gaza. College Democrats haven't been afraid to take a stand and, actually go up against the Biden administration on this consequential issue. I think there's this common misconception that a lot of these people who are protesting are some type of fringe left-wing radicals. But a lot of them are actually college Democrats who are actually civically engaged and care about, elections as a whole. And, if you're not listening to young people across the country who are literally getting beaten, literally getting arrested and pepper sprayed for standing up for global justice, it shouldn't be surprising that they didn't turn out in the numbers that we expected. So I think that's the biggest one. But I also think young people in general, we just want to know whether or not the people at the top care about our futures, right? We're not this kind of high up elite niche group that cares about culture war issues. We want to know, are we going to be able to afford a house? Are we going to be able to pay for our groceries? Are we going to be able to pay off our student loans? And while Democrats, we have the policies that solve each of these issues, we kind of fail to connect what you guys have referred to earlier in some of your earlier segments as the laundry list of Democratic policies to our daily lives. And I think failing to make that connection, coupled with the fact that the concerns of young people on Gaza were largely ignored, would be the two most predominant reasons why across the board we saw it.
Yeah, I've been thinking, Sanjay, too, about how it's almost like an instinct or it's like the typical protocol within the Democratic Party to sort of bash their young base. Post-Obama 2008. And even Obama after 2008 kind of, made a point of punching left and, hippie punching, which often ends up being the young, idealistic activists who bear the brunt of that. But, it's clear for me in particular with the response to the Bernie Sanders movement, which was largely a youth movement. And that was 8 years ago. So some of the people who were big Bernie Sanders supporters aren't under that age of 30 anymore. But it's indicative of the way that the Democratic Party tends to treat its young activist base, its young idealistic base. And, you see the same instinct with regard to the treatment of campus protesters, where you have Joe Biden, Kamala Harris going out of their way to condemn them, to smear them all as, blanket anti-Semites. And so, I don't think it should be surprising then when, if this is the treatment year after year after year, people start feeling like, even if they're not going to vote for Donald Trump, like, why am I going to show up and vote for these people who don't even really seem like they want me or my voice in their coalition?
Yeah, exactly. It definitely makes our job tough as college Democrats. I remember all the way back in May, Ryan Grimm actually covered this when we put out a statement in regards to this issue. I told the New York Times that, we can have all the manpower, all the organizing capacity, but if we're given a broken script that doesn't actually align with the best interests of college students, it's very tough for us to excite these type of voters. And that's why we spoke out as early as we did, because to us, it would be a disservice to the party if we didn't tell them that, hey, we know that you need youth to win. And looking at what we're seeing on the ground, where our own members of our organization are getting beaten and arrested, that's not going to do well for turnout. And I deeply do hope that in future election cycles, they learn from this. And I guess you don't need to agree with campus protesters and everything, but at the very least, support something as simple as an arms embargo. And I think what's really telling are the numbers in like Dearborn, Michigan, for example, where Rashida Tlaib won 60% of the vote.
That's right.
But Harris lost to Trump. And I think that should be proof that, we're not losing because we're failing to outcompete the right, that's shifting rightward. We're losing because we're failing to actually tap into issues that matter to both young people, but just Americans across the board.
Yeah. And I want to get back to that question of the vibes. We can put the next element up on the screen. This is E2, some responses to the New York Times, questions about, these are all Gen Z voters, by the way, who went for Donald Trump. And Pierce, 26 from North Carolina, says, I voted for Donald Trump. I decided after Kamala went on Call Her Daddy. Lillian, 27 of Virginia, said, I voted for Trump and made that decision the same day the mainstream media was having a meltdown after the Madison Square Garden rally. So one of the things I just want to put to you, Sanjay, is
LOL at the guy who wrote in Mike Bloomberg.
Mike Bloomberg, yeah, that's a weird one. He's really against big gulps. That was the factor for him.
He wanted an overt oligarch, and then not like a subtle one, just an overt one in the White House.
Yeah, but a little bit of a throwback too. But the question, it seems to me, this is very unusual for the right, but it seems to me like there's something very fashionable among people who listen to what they see as alternative, kind of dissident podcasts. People like Joe Rogan, people like Theo Vaughn. It almost became fashionable to vote for the Republican candidate because it's Donald Trump. And now for Republicans, that seems to me to be a problem because it won't translate after Donald Trump to other Republican candidates like a J.D. Vance. People won't see it in quite the same way. But could you speak to a little bit maybe what you saw among college students, college Republicans, and people even recently out of college when it came to that question of was there something actually very exciting to them about voting for Donald Trump? It's so unusual, again, just to see that for the Republican candidate among young people. But I get the sense that actually is what happened.
No, yeah, I mean, it's incredibly unusual to me. As like a Gen Z man on the left, I was shocked when NBC exit polling showed Trump, performing better among young men than our candidate. And I think the reason for this, I want to kind of come back to my first point about how I think, Donald Trump and his team have kind of successfully exploited, the loneliness epidemic that young men are facing. So, there's a lot of different rabbit holes you can fall into kind of when you're trying to in this search for meaning. And I kind of narrowed it down to three big ones. The first is kind of the whole self-help YouTuber or self-help influencer whose whole business model is predicated on you not getting self-help. Someone like Andrew Tate, who pushed out Hustlers University as this kind of way to escape the matrix, and it ended up just being a pyramid scheme where you're incentivized to share it with more people, and then he gets a cut of the revenue. I think the second group is kind of these largely apolitical, but slightly rightward leaning, kind of conservative influencers, the likes of Aiden Ross, Logan Paul, and I think you can throw in just a general conservative influencers who are also kind of entertainers, so likes of Charlie Kirk, Steven Crowder, and then the last group kind of being those who kind of defy the system as a whole, right? I think your best example is Joe Rogan, who, he can't be canceled because his network is bigger than anyone who would try to cancel him. CNN, they've got literally 1/28 of the viewership that he does. And I
even Neil Young and Joni, Joni Mitchell couldn't cancel him when they got mad at Spotify for.
Oh no, yeah, you literally can. And I think honestly, sidetracked, but I think us Democrats need to accept that and actually embrace his viewership. But I think Donald Trump kind of taps into all three of these different, I guess, rabbit holes in such a perfect manner. I would argue he's like the self-help influencer whose whole business model is predicated on you not getting self-help. We saw it with Trump University, which was, I don't know, starkly similar to, all these like niche pyramid schemes that we've seen with like the likes of Andrew Tate. He's obviously also kind of an entertainer. We've seen with The Apprentice, and his whole style is just entertaining, and he's defied the system. There is no, political precedent for Donald Trump, and I think him kind of effectively tapping into these three different realms is what's resulted in him being such a successful candidate.
That's such an insightful. That's so insightful about Trump University. I didn't really, in the Andrew Tate model being similar, and Trump University being like an old school version of that is so insightful.
Those categories are very helpful too.
Yeah.
Oh no, of course.
Go ahead, Sanjay. You can finish your point.
Oh no, yeah, but I think the point that I'm getting at is like they're successful in this regard, and then us as Democrats, the best way that we can combat this is to kind of combat traditional masculinity with modern masculinity. But I think until we do that, we're going to continue seeing young men kind of shift rightward.
I've been trying to figure out, Hassan Piker talks about how all of these, it's kind of similar to what you're saying, but how all of these spaces for men have just become like right wing. And so like, if you want to get fit, the fitness influencers are right wing. If you want to like the self-help, like it's Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate or whatever, like that's become right wing. If you're a gamer, like that pipeline is also right wing. If you're just like into weird history and aliens and shit, it's like Joe Rogan, and that's also right wing, So is that, I'm just trying to figure out the chicken and the egg scenario here. Like, did that, I don't know whether that was a response to where young men are, or whether young men were influenced by the fact that all those spaces trended to the right. You know what I'm getting at? Like, which caused which?
Well, I think that this is largely owed to the fact that us Democrats are always kind of on our high horse, and we're not willing to kind of go into spaces that are somewhat antagonistic to us. And that's kind of what's allowed the right to kind of have a monopoly on this so-called manosphere. So my advice to Democrats would be to do two things. One, to enter in these spaces. Get off your high horse and go on Joe Rogan. I remember I was sitting in class scrolling through Ground News, and then when I saw Donald Trump going on Joe Rogan, I was like, oh crap, this is not good. He's going to get like a massive viewership base, and Harris going to get none of this. And it's like, so I think the first thing is, we got to go into these spheres. And I think not just Joe Rogan, but I think they would break the internet if, say, like Kamala Harris or Tim Walz, for example, did a live stream with like Aiden Ross or Logan Paul. Because these are largely apolitical guys who don't really know much. But I think if you go in there and make your case, they'll hear you out. The second thing that I would, advise those that, who are more powerful than me in the party would be to kind of display a strong narrative that actually resonates with young men. And I think the narrative that I would push is a strong man stands up for himself, and a stronger man stands up for others. And what I mean by that is a strong man stands up for himself by, eating healthy, taking care of his body, going to the gym, but also taking care of his mind, going to therapy and being open with his emotions. It isn't weak to take the time to grow as a person. It's actually strong to go against the social norm of kind of having to man up and suffocating your emotions. But also stand up for others in the sense of championing LGBTQ rights, championing a woman's right to choose for the women that are important in your lives, championing a greater minimum wage so those who are less fortunate can, be able to put food on the table. But also, being able to support your family by or your loved ones or whoever by going out there and being successful career-wise. And I think we've got to, make this case of kind of the modern man, but also say that, we just believe this. We're going to help you get there.
Yeah, we have to be not boring. Like, that's the thing is, like, Joe Rogan didn't set out to, like, I'm going to indoctrinate. It was just like, he's entertaining and people want to listen to it. And if you have some, like, Democrats can be, like you said, kind of too high-minded and stuffy where it's like, this is not entertaining,
Well, and that's my last question, actually, Sanjay, is basically, like, that message, I think it makes sense, but are there ways that Democrats have to change their making of the message? I remember Nina Turner during the DNC saying that the Democratic Party feels too feminine for Black men, that it feels like it's been totally feminized. And James Carville has said something similar, that for men, it's almost like it would be unmanly for them to vote for Democrats, just the way that the party messages on some of these issues. It feels like it's undercutting masculinity. So how do Democrats make all of those cases about, what it means to be a strong man? Or, for example, even on positions I would disagree with on, whether it's, you could take any issue, immigration, anything like that. Like, how do you make that message not feel, whether or not we agree it's feminine or feminized right now? How do you make it so it doesn't hit the average male voter as feminized?
Well, I mean, I think it comes down to the narrative that I was mentioning, just about strongman being someone who stands up for others. I think for standing for a more just immigration system shouldn't be seen as feminine. I think if anything, it is incredibly masculine, to stand up for kind of the best interest of marginalized groups. And honestly, I think it's just a slight messaging issue. I think largely we're right on a lot of these issues across the board. But I think once Democrats are largely willing to kind of go into these manosphere spheres and directly speak to the concerns of young men, they'll be fine. It's tough for me to kind of talk about the feminization of the party, because I feel like as a guy who considers himself a feminist, I don't want to tap in too deep and kind of talk about something that I don't know if I have the credentials for. But I think just at the very least, as long as we go into these spaces and directly make the case about kind of connecting these policies in a way that kind of helps us young men kind of go out and live kind of like the provider-esque lives that we hope to, I think we'll be successful.
Well, I think there's models. I mean, Bernie is the obvious model. No one felt like Bernie's campaign was too femme. In fact, it was the opposite. It was smeared as being way too bro-y, and that was that was used to tag all his supporters you're toxic and you hate women, blah, blah, blah. So
and he went on Lex Friedman.
That's right. He did go on Lex Friedman. He went on with Joe Rogan. He got Joe Rogan's sort of endorsement, and that was very controversial. But, I mean, I would also say Hassan Piker, Hassan is very lefty, and no one would code him as being too femme. And I would put my husband Kyle Kalinske in that bucket too. And I think part of the problem is that Democrats, while Republicans are happy to go in any of these spaces, many of these spaces, Democrats don't. Not even on our own. Very few go on with Hassan. He's gigantic, right? The only Democrat who basically will come on this show is Ro Khanna, which kudos to him. But there should be more, and we're trying, even now after this whole reckoning about new media, reach out to Senator Chris Murphy's office, crickets.
Really?
Crickets. Yeah, and so, it's not just they won't go on the right-wing coded spaces. They won't even go in the left-wing coded spaces. So what do you expect? And a lot, the audience here is disproportionately male. All the YouTube audiences are, whether they're on the left or the right. Kyle's audience is disproportionately male. TYT, all these spaces are disproportionately male. And they won't even go on, the people who are more ideologically aligned with them, because they know they won't just get a shoulder massage the way they will from an MSNBC or a CNN.
No, yeah, I think you're spot on with that. I mean, I think that when you look at the future of the party, I look at Ro Khanna. I think he's one of our advisors at College Democrats of America, and the fact that he's willing to go on breaking points or just new media in general is testament to what the future of the party is. And I think, at this point, it's not a choice anymore. We saw what happened when we didn't, and now we're going to have no choice but to let go of these easily scripted conversations and actually go and, talk about what we really think. I think I'm not the biggest fan of Joe Rogan's antics as a whole, but I do appreciate the medium. I think the medium of a 3-hour unscripted conversation is just good for a democracy in general. And I would strongly hope that, those at the top of the DNC embrace that sentiment and start pushing our candidates to be more authentic and be able to survive 3-hour-long conversations.
Sanjay, really insightful thoughts and comments from you this morning. Really grateful for your time. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.